In news overseas, delivering his annual speech to Russian Parliament, President Vladimir Putin promised an asymmetric response to the West and specifically to the United States should Washington decide to deploy its intermediate-range nuclear weapons in Europe. The Russian leader said his country would target decision-making centers in the West if the U.S. doesn't give credence to Moscow's concerns. Responding to Putin's remarks, NATO said such threats are unacceptable. Igor Shinkanenko has more.
In one of his most confrontational speeches directed at the West in recent years, Russian President Vladimir Putin has chastised the United States for leaving the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Putin warned America's leadership against deploying intermediate-range missiles in Europe.
The U.S. neglected and deliberately ignored the essence of the positions laid out in the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. In particular, according to the agreement, and I quote, each of the sides is to liquidate their intermediate-range missiles and their launch installations.
Addressing the country's two-chamber parliament, the Federal Assembly, during his annual State of the Nation speech on February 20th, Russian president said that Moscow would not only target the countries hosting the U.S. weapons, but the United States itself.
Russia will be forced to create and deploy weapons aimed not only at territories housing missile systems that threaten us, but also toward the places where decisions are made to use those rockets against us.
February 2nd, following 5 years of heated accusations by the U.S. and its NATO allies that Moscow is violating the Cold War-era agreement, the Trump administration suspended the INF Treaty, a key nuclear arms control pact with Russia.
Russia has jeopardized the United States' security interest, and we can no longer be restricted by the treaty while Russia shamelessly violates it.
Washington gave Moscow 6 months to fully comply with the INF Treaty before it ends the deal August 2nd. NATO says Russians were violating the agreement by developing and fielding the 9M729 missile system, which, as Western allies argue, poses significant risks to Euro-Atlantic security.
Perhaps the biggest achievement of the first summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un was that it happened at all. But when the two leaders meet again next week, that likely won't be good enough. More from VOA's Bill Gallo on the high expectations for the second Trump-Kim summit in Vietnam.
Last year in Singapore, Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un agreed to work toward the complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. In Vietnam, there will be pressure to clarify what that idea even means and how to start implementing it.
I think there's pressure on both sides to have a tangible outcome, unlike the first summit. Otherwise, I think it's going to be branded a failure, and then we're back to square one.
The U.S. wants North Korea to take a tangible step towards dismantling its nuclear weapons, such as destroying a key nuclear site, or providing a list of its nuclear and missile inventory. North Korea wants the U.S. to provide sanctions relief, or a formal end to the 1950s Korean War. But the most productive outcome could be an agreement to hand the process off to lower-level officials.
The two leaders of the countries can't solve everything themselves. I don't think they have a thorough enough understanding to be able to take care of some of these really complex issues that you're going to need scientists on, that you're going to need technical experts on.
There are signs Vietnam will be more substantive than Singapore. In preparation for the summit, U.S. officials have held more working-level meetings with their North Korean counterparts. And in Vietnam, the two sides will have 2 days of meetings rather than just one to make concrete progress on a nuclear deal.